Morning, boys. I think we're live.
This
I
is
think
not
so.
Coffee and Ham
So,
Radios.
no, it's not. So, today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about ground planes. And I had posted a book video, or I was talking about a book, and in that I showed a map of the United States. And I was jokingly said, you can look here to see how bad the conductivity is for your grounding. And some guy in the comments came back and goes, "Hey, is that kind of like an inside joke? Or are you being serious there?" And I said a little bit of both, and he came back and said, "Hey, can you explain that a little bit more?" And so I was thinking about making a video today, and then I reached out to James and To because they're two of my buddies that have DX commanders and have
Rock
lived
on.
the radial ground plane.
Live the
Indeed.
ground plane life.
Yeah, so we got some expert eyewitnesses here. So first, thanks to everybody for joining in. Thanks everybody for being in the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them. We'll try to get to them. But that said, I guess I could jump in and get started unless you guys wanted to start talking about the. All right, well,
The
let
snow,
me
the
do this.
squirrels, moving south for
Yeah.
the winter.
So
Steve's Windows out of the box experience, which has been pretty entertaining.
yeah, that's been a good
Sharing.
one.
It sounds like bitching, but really it's just sharing.
Well, like we were just joking around. I mean, the thing is that all of the major OSs have problems here and there, but installing Windows, you're going to be in for a ride. So what we have here is this is not the map from the book, but this is a map that shows effective ground conductivity in the United States, and it says for AM broadcast stations, but it holds true for amateur radio folks like us. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is everybody's always talking about seawater, and they're like, "Hey, I was by the beach," or our buddy Walt at Coastal Waves and Wire, he does a great job demonstrating how well he can get out at QRP levels because he's on the water. And so in this map, you can see that when you talk about earth or ground in the United States, it ranges from zero point 0.5 to 30 millimos. I don't know how you say that. It says or
Mahos?
millisiemens per meter.
Can
Do
you
know
make
how
that
to-
map a little bigger, dude?
Yeah, I will. 1 second.
Mm.
But what we have here says the conductivity of seawater is 5,000 millimos per meter.
Not ohms, but mo's. Right.
Oh,
Right,
I
so
get
this-
that.
We're going to use the exact same letters. We're just going to rearrange them to make it more confusing.
Yeah, and so 5,000 is a lot, but if you look at the map, and here it is,
Oh, okay.
the highest that you're going to get is in like central United States, and you see it at around 30, and then as you push out to the coast, there's some 30 here in California, but I mean these numbers are dismal. Right? We were looking at down here where my good friend FEP Labs Radio James is around 4. So the ocean is more than 1,000 times better or has more conductivity than his ground there. And so that's kind of why folks will do things like put up their artificial ground planes using wire or chicken mesh or all kinds of other things. Now, you hear hams talk about all kinds of things that they've done. They're like, well, I flood my backyard and that way I get better. It has to be salt water.
I pee on my ground plane.
Yeah, fresh water is
Right.
not. But that's the other thing. Like Tio said, a lot of people will claim that they pee in their backyard or they pee at their antenna feed put.
You ain't making enough of a change.
Hillbillies.
Yeah, I mean, like I pee outside all the time too, but it's not for my antenna. It's just
There you go.
somebody's in the
Because
band.
somebody got to pee. Look at this. Let me ask you a question because I see something already that's very interesting.
Fire away.
If you look at California, NorCal up there close to Charles on the coast, that's
There's
a
a 30.
30.
Yeah, wow.
And then if you
Yep.
look at
I'll
the
just
East
freeze.
Coast,
There it is.
it's nowhere near that. So the Pacific has more piss in it. Is that what I'm saying here? Or-
It might
It kind
be,
of
but
explains a lot,
it,
doesn't it?
it would also might have something to do with the way the currents maybe because like this way this points out like if you think about like a meandering river the way that deposits work so you have a current that comes down here maybe it's depositing minerals or something. I've got no idea. That's pure speculation.
Well, I just it's just weird. And then if you look in the middle of the U.S., west of the Mississippi, straight up from the Texas, there's a lot of high,
Yeah, a lot of 30s there.
yeah, and in places where there is no water flow. So I'm completely baffled. I mean, they got better dirt. Is that
Beats me. I honestly have
composition
no
of the
idea.
dirt? Maybe a higher mineral content in the dirt.
I have heard that in places like Kuwait, the electrical ground is actually above the dirt level. So, like, we put our ground radials on the dirt, And then if you
Right.
start elevating them, you have to make them resonant. Well, in like Kuwait, for example, you put them above the ground because you still haven't reached the ground. The two
Wow.
Yeah,
different
because
kinds.
on sand, I guess you probably have to use tuned radials where you don't have to as much with
Because there's just no moisture in the soil at all.
yeah. That's certainly interesting. So when you guys did your DX commanders, what were you thinking, and like what kind of setup did you guys use for your ground plane?
Honestly, I was thinking this is going to be quite a pain in the butt to make all of these radials, and then how am I going to cut the grass and all kinds of stuff? And so I
Mhm.
had to, find a little because I have this really weird mix of soil and shade and sunlight and so forth, where I either have like bald patches because of the shade, or I have very dense, thick grass because of other reasons. And it's like there's just no good in between place. And then it's also got to be close to the ham shack, so you have shorter coax and so on and so on. And I just found this little grove of trees to shove it in between, so it's protected from all kinds of elements except for snow.
Mine
So
was
how many
kind
radials
of
did you put
similar.
out?
All of them, all the ones that he specifies. So
I
like
think I did
five sets of
five
five
sets of
or
three
whatever.
meters,
Yeah, but I
something
made
like
them all 10 meters on mine.
Oh Lord. Okay. I was way too lazy for that. I didn't have room for 10-meter radials because that would have gone out. Mine's in a spot toward the back of the back of the yard, but I have cattle pasture around me on two sides.
That's where you get it from.
And the cows will walk over the top of stuff and cut it with their hooves. So I didn't want radials out in the pasture, plus which that would have had to been going back and forth through the barbed wire. And it's kind of a non-positive outcome for an old fat guy. But I did like 5 or 6 batches of 3 meters apiece, and Callum's done some video on that where the performance curve, the performance curve versus the radial curve. Screw it. This is
Diminishing returns, yeah.
yeah, very much the point of
He
diminishing
talks about
returns.
the Rudy Severance study, and there is. I mean, you put out four radials total, and you have results A, and then you put out 16 radials total, you have results B, and then you put out 32 radials, and you have results C. And like 33 radials doesn't give you results D; it gives you results C and an
C.1.
eighth. Yeah,
Yeah,
like not enough to worry about.
right.
Yeah, so I actually did a video where an MMANA gal, it's an antenna modeling software, where
My
I
favorite.
started with a vertical
Yeah.
with no radials. And I went 4, 8, 16, 32. I think that 32 is where where that curve starts to give you diminishing returns on your ground plane. Now, when you add more radials, what it does is it takes the radiation pattern and makes it less round and starts to smush it down a little bit, so you get more energy coming out at a lower takeoff angle. And then when you think about that takeoff angle, when it goes up and it hits the ionosphere and then
Hmm.
comes back down, the lower that angle that hits that, the more obtuse your angle, which means that it's going to go further and you're going to get more DX
Around the world, DX.
or across the earth is what we'll say. But and then
He caught me. He caught me. I threw out my spherist point of view.
but a lot of times people say, "Oh, you just need one radial." Or some people say you don't need any, and you can use the earth. You can, and that'll work. But there's works and there's works well, and then works better. If you put one or two out and they go into a particular direction, you're going to get directivity. Your antenna will be stronger in that area because what happens is like with your vertical, you have radio waves going up like this up to the ionosphere, but you also have them coming down into the ground. And if the ground's not conductive, what happens is that you get absorption of your RF as opposed to reflection of your RF to go back up towards the sky. And so it can make a huge difference. The other thing I was going to mention is that like I bought some of these, and I'm going to be making some radials for a vertical antenna that I'm going to be testing. And when I was messing around with this feels like hardened steel to me. Maybe it's not, but when you have a piece of metal like this as opposed to copper, it has a higher ohmic resistance because of the hardening process. So a lot of times when people say, "Oh, I put all the solder in, I put all these terminal plugs and all these things on my radials," you change the characteristics of your radial, just like you would of an element, and then the electricity struggles a little bit to get out there. The other thing I was going to talk about is a lot of times you'll have a vertical antenna tuned for 20 meters, and then you put on your ground plane, and your SWR goes up, and a lot of people are like, "Well, my SWR went up. This is bad." What you're seeing is likely increase in capacitance because you're capacitively coupling your antenna to the ground. So you do get an impedance raise there, but you're going to get better performance because of the your signals are no longer being absorbed by the ground, but they're going to be reflected by the ground. Whew. If that makes sense.
Yep.
So I'm a fan of them, and one of the things I was going to do is I'm going to actually show some proof. So I've got a textbook here. So give me 1 second to get
Look at
this.
Randall all dressed up in his thumbnail picture there.
It's like
That's
a
quite
look at
respectable.
Yeah, look at that.
Randall, I thought about that, but I didn't have an edger and I didn't want to go buy one at the moment. Where my antenna's at is kind of in a no man's land behind a couple of trees and a small shed. So I just let the grass grow, and it got kind of hideous.
He was talking about using like an edger.
I weed eated it because I never did get them nailed down.
It was I think he was talking about using an edger. And the other hand, he says he put down 1,200 feet of radials. I bet you that's not cheap when you start to talk about that much.
Dang it, son.
But you only have to do it once.
Right.
Yeah, I guess. So let me get this set up here. I'm always, futzing around, but let me move my keyboard. And so I'm a big fan of people buying books to educate themselves. This is the ARRL Handbook for Amateurs. Look at this, $25, but this is from 1993.
Yeah. What's that in 2023 dollars?
I
50?
have no idea. But the thing is that it's from 1993, so it's 20 years old. But I got it for like $11 off of eBay, so you can still get good material and good information. But this has a really good explanation of ground systems. And so I just wanted to point out a couple things. It says the importance of an effective ground system for vertical antennas cannot be emphasized too strongly. However, it's not always possible to install a radial network that approaches ideal. Poor ground is better than no ground at all, and therefore amateurs should experiment with whatever's physically possible rather than saying, hey, I'm just not going to do a vertical antenna. Down here, what it says is generally a number of shorter radials are better for ground systems than a few longer ones. For example, 8 radials at an eighth of a wave are preferred to 4 radials at a quarter wave. And that's because you're getting more coverage around your antenna. What I can tell you is 8 radials of a quarter wave are better than 8 radials of an eighth of a wave, right? Because you still have more copper down there. And I think that the thing is that what they say is that you want to be a quarter wavelength on the lowest frequency that you're going to operate on for optimal performance. But again, put down whatever you can. And if there's a chicken coop there, then just put down radials on the side that's away from the chicken coop. But other Andy, what he got me thinking here is that conductivity size of the radials is not especially significant. Wire gauges from 4 to 20 have been used successfully. I always use this wire that I get from Geek. I think it's Geek IT. It might be Gear IT, but it's speaker wire, 18 gauge
speaker wire.
Speaker wire.
Somebody had asked in the chat about I don't know, about the size of the wire. Was there any significant difference?
I would just use inexpensive speaker wire. And it doesn't have to be copper, although copper helps.
You're creating a reflective surface.
DX10 that I made or whatever, the secret Callum wire. I should have used some cheap stuff and saved that for.
So there's an opposite law of diminishing returns. Like literally your returns will be diminishing. Like if you put down chicken wire, it's plentiful, it's cheap, etc. It will actually start to rust in the ground, and then you'll literally be able to hear that rusting in your ear on the radio, and you can't get rid of it.
On that.
Callum's the one that told me that. So,
I love Callum, but he might have been playing the drums too long, and he's just hearing a little tinnitus or something in there.
But it does rust. It does rust away.
I'm not arguing the rusting, but I don't think you can hear ions escaping in the dirt.
No, you can hear the static in the ears.
And then maybe I don't know.
And he's attributing it to that. But either way, it disappears underneath your feet.
And, your ground plane is going to rust. Yes, absolutely.
And then it'll poke out, and you'll step on it in your bare feet.
I don't go outside my bare feet, man. I ain't a girl.
So
I walk on rocks. My daughter.
I almost never wear shoes. So the thing is like when you're putting up something like a DX Commander for a long-term external installation, you probably have to take more things into consideration, like UV protection of those wires and stuff. Like I've got just a little couple verticals that I go out and I stick up for a couple days, run out my speaker wire. I get my speaker wire, get like 800 feet for like $25. I don't really care that much. You know what I mean? If I have to replace it. So what I think I'm going to do with these is I'm going to do 4 bundles of 5, which will give me 20 radials, and I'm going to do them at 17 feet. And that should
Whatever
be
fits
awesome.
inside that crimp.
Yeah, that's about what's
Yeah.
on my DX Commander on both of them is 5. I did 5 meters. Is that right? Yeah, 5 meters, which is 16, 17 feet, something like that.
Yeah, and so Bass Angler, and we have some more stuff we're going to pull up. He's dead on where the radials are just a reflector. So what it's doing is it's helping the signal that's coming out of your antenna hit when it hits that ground plane to go back up. Same thing with incoming signals. When they hit that, they'll bounce up and go into your antenna. It's different than an earth ground. So like a lot of times people say, hey, well, I hammered a ground rod in and I use that. Well, you're really using that more for lightning protection, and you're using that for like static discharge and stuff like that. The problem is that goes straight down into the ground, and the way that my understanding, the way RF traverses the earth is more on the top of it. And so that's why we don't bury our radials, but an inch or so in the ground, and don't bury them very deep. I'm not saying you don't want to put a ground rod out by your antenna. What I'm saying is you still want a radial plane out there as a ground plane. And we got a question here from KE4.
Type in an answer for that.
Go, fire away.
Yeah, so Hayden did this on his channel, and I had to laugh at him. He did the 5 wires in one bundle plugged into the radial plate on the DX Commander, and then he ran that bundle of 5 wires straight out from the antenna in a bundle the whole way out. Think of it not like a bundle of wires that you put down, but spread them out, like each one points individually to a second on the analog clock. So what you're doing is you're creating a reflective surface. You're creating a plane, which is why we call it a ground plane, to off of, as opposed to 5 individual bundles of lumped together wire, which creates 5 points of reflection. So 5 spread out times 5 would be 25 radials. I can do 5 times 5.
That is
as opposed to
that's awesome.
5 to
Another thing too, and this probably won't apply to everybody, but I have a bundle of Cat 5 Ethernet wire on a spool from 1999, and Cat 5 Ethernet wire in 2023 is pretty much worthless because you can't get good speed on it. That's built-in radio wire, man. All you really got to do is slit the outer cable off, and then you have a bundle of 4 pairs of 24 gauge, 26 gauge wire if you wanted to. And I did a random wire on a 9-to-1, and the entire ground plane on that is 130 or 40 foot length of Cat 5 twisted together on both ends and thrown out in the yard. That's it.
So Bob was asking a question here about how deep, and I wouldn't go more than like 2 inches deep. I like I said, I do all portable stuff, so I would just put them on the top of the ground. But I would target around 2 inches or so. If somebody's running like a plugger or doing aeration, they're going to damage your stuff at that level. So I get it. I guess just do what works for you. And we got a new person to the channel. I don't recognize seeing Mr. Hutton before, but he says all anyone needs to do is water the ground rods. They will grow and your noise level will dorp a lot. Good luck. I'm assuming he means drop. But then down here, he's telling us to do a little bit of research, please, before we tell people this info. And then down here is the other half of the antenna. You guys have been doing this very long. Good luck. I'm not sure I understand all that. I don't know if you're joking around or being an asshole, but I think you might end up in timeout, bro. Let's see what else we have on here. Jeff is saying good luck around planes, or what's
Jeff
good
knows.
on amateur radio. Yeah.
Jeff knows what's up.
It is a controversial topic, as you can see. So the other thing I did is I went to Wikipedia and I pulled this up because let's see if I can make that any bigger. Is it the Control Plus is my thing that I want to be doing?
Look at that.
So what it says here, the ground plane is electrically conductive surface usually connected to an electrical ground. That would be if you do have a ground rod out there. It says in antenna theory, a ground plane is conducting surface large in comparison to a wavelength such as the Earth. It's connected to the transmitter ground wire and serves as a reflecting surface for radio waves. So with AC current's alternating current, right? And when you send a signal out, there is a signal that comes back in. And if you don't have some sort of grounding, and a ground plane works fantastic for this, you're going to have signal come down your transmission line, like your coaxial cable, and that can cause problems with RFI in your shack, and you don't really want that. So ground planes play a good role for that. And the other thing is that what I wanted to cover is elevated ground. So we're gonna get to that in 1 second. But it gives your antenna something to work against, because AC current is kind of a push-pull current, and your antenna performs better if it has that mechanism to ground, for example, your ground plane, versus using something like your coaxial transmission line. Now, the length of the coax, we talked a little bit about this when we looked in the handbook. I mean, the length of your radials doesn't really matter a whole heck of a lot
Right.
if you have it on the ground itself. If you have an elevated vertical and then you have an elevated ground plane, then what you have there is they want you to tune your radials. And they say you should have at least 1 or 2 tuned radials for that. And that's because
For
your
each
antenna,
band you're interested in.
yeah, because your antenna there really becomes more of a dipole in
Right.
an L configuration as opposed to
L dipole.
yeah.
And there's an interesting point in that second paragraph under radio antenna theory. To function as a ground plane, the conducting surface must be at least a quarter of a wavelength
yeah, of the radio waves in radius.
in radius.
Yes, as in lower frequency antennas, such as the mast radios used for broadcast antennas, the Earth itself, or a body of water such as a salt marsh or ocean, is used for a ground plane. And they do that a lot down in Florida, where they use the swamps and the marshy
Right.
ground to do radio stations, and they put the transmitter site out in the middle of an alligator-infested swamp.
It keeps away the vandals, right?
Yeah, and so this is one of the diagrams that I wanted to cover, and it shows a little bit about how the reflectivity off of the ground works. So it says for a monopole antenna, the Earth acts as a ground plane to reflect radio waves directed downwards, making them seem to come from the antenna, the image antenna. And that's what you get when we talk about better performance, and how this is going to work a little bit better for you to help concentrate your signal versus it being absorbed by the ground.
So that looks like longer's better too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like when you shorten them up, you're definitely getting a compromise. If you make them a quarter wave and your antenna is like a quarter wave vertical, it's going to perform a little bit better. Now you can do them shorter, or the other thing that people will do is that they'll load their radials with like an induction coil. So they'll look electrically longer, but they're physically shorter. But in that case, you're going to miss some of the angle reflection because of the way that's going to come down and hit the Earth. So I'm a fan of, if I have I'd like to use 20 meter verticals. So about 17 and a half feet high. And then I do 17 and a half foot radials. But, if you had I don't know, 40 meter vertical, then you might get into a little bit of a pickle.
So on the DX Commander, what is that, a quarter wave for 40?
Yeah, I think one of his antennas though is a 5/8, but I'm not.
I think that's the
big one, right?
The big sexy one. So my question was about the radio. Though you talked about elevated.
Mm-hmm.
When did they become elevated radials? I mean, so if I want to set my DX Commander on a brick sitting on the ground, so it's not all dug down in the dirt, is that elevated, or does it have to be up some amount of the wavelength of the different antenna elements?
Well, I missed part of that question because I was dealing with our buddy over here. But one of the things that I always ask people is that how high does a vertical have to be mounted off the ground before it's no longer considered a ground-mounted vertical?
There you go. Right.
Or so like you have the Buddy Pole Stick Pro or whatever, the new antenna that came out, and that's
Buddy
only
Stick Pro, yeah.
Yeah, that's only a few feet off the ground, but I believe that they tell you to have one tuned radial on that antenna at that point. If you had 4, you had 8, I'm sure it would perform a little bit better. So I'm assuming a couple feet off the ground. I honestly don't know how high before it's considered a non-ground mount.
I didn't know if anybody'd seen a formula for that, or even a country rule of thumb.
There probably is, but your DX Commander sitting on a brick off the ground, your radials are going to come out and then go right down onto the ground.
Yeah, I mean we're talking 2 or 3 inches at most.
But the radial itself would have to be 3 inches off the ground the entire length of the radial.
Okay.
So
Yes.
make it worth your while to do that. I would start getting it to like above head height on my lawn tractor, and then start worrying about, you know, exact length of L dipole shaped elements.
That's the dirty secret of ham radio is mowing around and dealing with radials, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was talking to a guy who was saying he had his antenna mounted on the ground, but then they put up I guess it's called a pergola, over his back porch or whatever, and he moved the
Fancy words.
antenna up onto top of that, and it stopped working for him, and that's when he had to go down the road of tuned elements.
A pergola.
So Ryan is saying,
Swedish thing, I think.
wouldn't elevated mean one wavelength off the ground? I think it could be much lower than that. So if you had like a 20 meter, then that would be, what is that, 60 feet in the air, right?
What we need is someone with a lot of land and a lot of time on their hands to test both of these things at multiple heights off the ground and figure out where it actually makes the difference. And I would bet it probably doesn't make a difference.
No other, Andy. You're right. If it's elevated radials, they need to be cut.
Yeah, the same. Or tuned, right? So you could use induction coils and stuff like that to
Right.
load them to make them look longer. The other thing is a lot of times what folks will do is they'll take like a vertical antenna. So you can have a 20 meter vertical antenna, and then about the 2/3 of the way up, you can put a trap in there. Will make it work. So you can put it in for like 15. So that way you would have a multi-banded vertical antenna that the trap stops it at 15 meters, so you can use it for that. And then 20 meters would be the full length. The trap will let the 20 meter frequencies through. And an antenna like that, what you would still want is quarter wavelength of 20. So that way, when you're using the 20 frequency, it's not, your antenna is still going to perform at its an optimal level. If that makes sense.
So how do you end up with an antenna that says no radials required?
I think it's BS.
I had
It's just like when people say things like, "Oh, you don't need a counterpoise," or you don't need a CMC choke, or any of that kind of stuff. I just think it works because it works, and I go back to it works. It works well. It works better when you have some of that stuff. I can't imagine an antenna that wouldn't benefit from an enhanced ground.
Well, I mean, this is the thing that we talk about all the time, is that antennas are compromises. Every single antenna, period, is a compromise of some kind. There's no such thing as a perfect antenna, because the weather changes right out from underneath of you as you've got your antenna installed. And I'm not going out and building a new antenna every hour of the day.
right.
So, do what works best in your situation.
It's like, oh, it's working. Don't touch it. Don't look at it. Don't think about it.
I've got a 100-meter doublet.
Don't mow the grass over there. Leave that alone. There may be snakes, but it's okay. Just don't walk over there, honey.
I've got a 100-meter doublet. Not a lot of people have the land for a 100-meter doublet. I know people that have got 4 beverage antennas that are 5 wavelengths long. Not everybody has the land for that. It's just you do what you can to get on the air, and you enjoy the results of that and the experimentation that goes along with that. I started off with a G5 RV, and everybody was telling me that's a compromise antenna. Well, no shit, Sherlock. It's a compromise antenna. But I contacted Japan from Wisconsin. Do what you got to do.
Compromise to me. Now, Bill has an interesting comment, Abe. Did you see that?
I did. We'll get to it in one second. But what I always tell people is that work with what you got where you got it. So go outside, get an antenna up, and then you're going to learn something. And then you'll be able to make incremental improvements. Your first antenna is not going to be your last one. So Bill's saying, for what it's worth, he has DX Engineering radial plate 3 feet off the ground, and he used to have a Hustler on a tilt, but now a DXC. Now the DXC sits 12 inches off the ground. That's 3 inches. I said 3 feet, I think. With the pole inside, and it works great. Yeah, when I was looking up stuff from grounding yesterday, the DX Engineering ground kit came up. And now, when somebody was saying that these antennas that say you don't need to use a ground, they say you use 100 feet of coax. And so what's happening there is that with your 100 feet of coax, you're using the shield, as Andy, our good friend Andy Calley, saying, as a radiator to work against that the vertical part of your antenna. And they say to use 100 feet because they're hoping that it's going to attenuate by the time it gets back to your ham shack, so you're getting minimum feedback into your equipment. But, I would put a choke at the antenna feed point. I'd put a choke at the shack feed point just in case. But I would also use a radial system with that antenna. And then we had...
Hey,
Todd. And I guess we're supposed to do a dance, right? So
Well, you
let
have
me,
to
It's
do
your
all
channel,
that.
man. You set the
Your channel,
stage.
Beers, and
does everybody calm down?
I ain't got nothing to click, son.
I'm clicking it.
Ever since we got Ape to start dancing, he ain't stopped.
Right.
Yeah, boy.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate
Dance
it.
off.
Well, Todd, I tell you, we used to stream on each other's channels all the time, and I just hadn't done it in a while. And
He was getting rusty.
yeah, and so we were just kind of BSing around a little bit yesterday and decided to do it. So here we are.
It's all your fault anyway.
Yeah, here we go. AP2FLY. He's saying he's got a trapped end fed vertical configuration for 17 and 20. Obviously, it's without radials and it works great. And yes, and no more a ground plane. Yes, it's no more a ground plane. Yeah, that's the thing. They can work great. Sometimes they can work a little bit better. But again, go with what you got where you got it, and that's awesome, man.
Well, it's like similar to the Apollo. The Apollo will antenna. The Apollo will antenna without the counterpoise.
Sure will.
But you're generally going to see better results with a counterpoise on it.
You do you, man.
Well,
Yeah.
I respect your decisions.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the myth there is on the Apollo. Let's pick on that one since we know it, especially you. I'm going to put up my Apollo. I'm going to check my SWR, and I'm going to be real happy with my SWR. But you're just looking at SWR there because you have no counterpoise. You're not really radiating nearly as well as you think you are. Yes, the antenna is resonant, and your meter's happy with it, but your meter's not radiating to Russia. Your meter is just checking, electrically what it looks like with a very, very extremely low power signal.
Yeah, and you're attempting to use your coaxial cable as your counterpoise. And so a lot of folks are like, hey, I'm just fine operating like that. And that's awesome. I don't do it. I use counterpoise. But, if that's how somebody wants to operate and use the counterpoise as the coax as a counterpoise, cool.
Follow your truth.
Yeah, I don't necessarily do that. But I also talk a little bit about so when you have a dipole, when you feed it in the center and you have it at perfect height, you get about 75 ohms of feed point impedance at the center of your dipole. If you start to move that off center, your impedance goes up until you get to the end. So with with an off center fed dipole, you typically feed it somewhere around 66% and 33 on the other side. And when you do that, you have an impedance somewhere around 450 ohms. With an end fed dipole, you're at 2,450, somewhere right around there, ohms, because you're feeding it at the very end for your impedance where it's very high. And when you tack a counterpoise on there, you're kind of making the whole thing an off-center fed dipole again, right? Because that end of the counterpoise is going to act the way that the short end of the off-center fed dipole acts. And it's funny because a lot of times I'll ask people who profess to be antenna experts that question, how's it different? And they'll say, well, it's because it's fed at the end, and then the other one is fed. But the second that you put that other piece of antenna for it to work against, it's essentially becoming an off-center fed dipole at that point.
So how
Marvin's
long of
asking.
a counterpoise? Yeah.
So I usually start with 17 feet and work from there. I generally don't go any longer. Sometimes I'll trim them up. I just usually use 17 feet, regardless of the size of the end fed. But I typically use the end fed at 60 feet, 66 feet for 40 meters.
So that's your quarter wave of 20 meters or 40 meters.
Yeah, and some people will tell you, well, you're supposed to use 20% of the length of the long side. And there's just like everything, right, in ham radio, there's a million opinions in debate.
And they're all right.
Yeah, I've used 17 and I've had luck with it. I don't know if that's the right answer or the wrong answer, but that's my answer. And
We give you like 30 feet with the Apollo.
they're right. That way you can cut it twice, and hopefully it's still long enough.
Right. Hey, Chuck's here. Good morning, Chuck.
Oh my goodness.
Howdy, Chuck.
And then Gary's asking my favorite question. Besides SWR, what else should I be looking for transmission-wise? There was a time in amateur radio when we didn't even know what SWR was. We hadn't invented SWR yet. And those old hams were still getting on the air and still making contacts somehow. Don't ask me.
Yeah, well, what people start to do is use Smith charts to actually look for resonance versus SWR. And the thing is that you can be resonant at a impedance different than 50 ohms. So like a dipole that is at perfect height above ground, which is a half of wavelength, is 75 ohms, which is really going to be a 1.5 SWR. So when you think about SWR is used for power transfer from your source to your load being your antenna, source being your radio. And because if we go out and spend a bunch of money on a 100-watt radio, we want 100 watts to make it towards that antenna. So I have to have a perfect match of 50 ohms in order for that to happen. Now, once it hits that antenna, how well it radiates or dissipates into the atmosphere is going to depend upon, the material of your antenna. Does it have ohmic loss or not? The type of antenna, is it directional? Maybe it's a vertical, which is omnidirectional, versus a Yagi, which is pointed in one direction. So you're going to get things that change there. I typically look for resonant antenna, which just happens to be close to 50 ohms. But if I have an antenna that's like 1.5, I don't really care. I want it closer to the I'll say the equator in the Smith charts. That way I have more of a resonant antenna. Right. So my antenna will perform better, but maybe I'll still get some reflected power on my transmission line. Hopefully
the other thing, and this kind of getting a little out of the topic, but you made a point about the SWR and the amount of power transferred at the antenna. The other thing that is hard to see with an SWR is how much loss you're getting on your coax to your actual antenna from your feed point, your radio, the backside of the radio, all the way out to wherever the antenna is parked at. And coax matters. Generally, fatter coax is better coax. And frequency matters too. At HF frequencies, there's so much loss per 100 feet usually, and there's charts all over the internet for this, for all the different kinds of coax. So when you talk about an antenna, it's also an antenna system, and all these things play into it. Cashler said everything affects everything, and he's right.
Yep,
it does. And this is the ground plane is one piece of this, and that's going to affect how well you get out and how well you're heard and how well you can receive. So
here's a question. Will putting radials in a plastic water pipe or PVC compromise them? I do think that there are, and Chuck, I wish he was here because he's always spouting off Schedule 40, Schedule 7. There are some flavors of PVC that do have an impact on RF. So,
it changes the velocity factor.
Now, what I can tell you is that people recommend that you use a PVC coated wire for long-term installations of radial systems in the backyard because it's more environmentally durable, right? For like sun and stuff like that. But I'm sorry, I don't.
Not environmentally friendly, just environmentally durable. Environmentally hostile.
The PVC question has come up before on car before. That's an interesting question. So that would mean, and if it changes the VF, it can't change it much.
I've had Slim Jim antennas. Like I have a Slim Jim antenna from Comet that's inside of a PVC pipe, and I think that Ed Fong sells some that are inside there. So there are PVCs that work fine, but I think that there's ones that maybe have something in the material that that can cause you some problems.
Of course, you're kind of making it a dielectric because you have an air gap around the antenna. I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've built a ground plane that's got PVC vertical, and the reason I did it was I wanted to make sure that the vertical stayed erect, and
Right.
it did. It changed the velocity factor of it. I mean, it was just something to make a note of, make an adjustment, and move on with your life.
Yeah, you see that with bare copper versus insulated copper, that the velocity factor changes with insulation.
Yeah.
Paul's saying the end-fed half-wave does not turn into an off-center fed dipole with a counterpoise. The 49-to-1 will not allow this. Okay, but the thing is that an off-center fed dipole has a 4-to-1, not a 49-to-1. So it depends on where you feed it. Some of them have 5-to-1, some have a 3.5-to-1. It just depends on where you feed it. It's the same thing, right? I mean, you have a element that's coming out of that unun, and then you have a ground that's coming out of that. Now, whether you want to have that ground hanging in the air or laying across the ground, it's still a ground that's coming out of an unun, and it works against the alternating current. I would like to know technically how it's different there, but
I think
really gotten a clean
distinction without
answer.
a difference either way. I mean, it literally is off-center fed at that point when you add on that extra wire.
Sure enough. Let's see what else we got here. he's saying Ed Fong's antenna specify 200 ppi. Is it pounds per inch or is that particles per?
Well, Todd had
I don't
said
know what
something
that
a minute ago about Ed specifies the exact PVC to use for his stuff too.
Sure enough, yeah. So there you go. You might be able to look it up over at Eddie Fong's site. And I've got 2 of his antennas. He does fantastic work, and he is a professor at a college, and he has the students involved in making that. And I think they operate as kind of a nonprofit. So he's a good
I
guy.
think it's like a fundraiser for the
Are they
school,
better
yeah.
students than someone else who had trouble?
Maybe. I think that might have been everything that I had. I don't know if you boys had anything else you wanted to add. We could just continue to take some questions for a while.
Oh, Professor, I thought you was doing a good job there, buddy.
Yeah, Scott's saying that he would gauge of wire make a difference 16 to 22. So what we looked at earlier in the video in the handbook, it said anywhere from 4 to I think it was 4 to 20. If 22 is what you got, that's what I would use. I use 18 gauge speaker wire because it's abundantly cheap and inexpensive, and that's what I would recommend to folks.
I mean, yeah, the short answer is yes, it will. The long answer is it's a compromise.
And if you can drop the cash for 4 gauge radial wire, son, you do you.
Well, what he's doing is he's making an investment, and in 30 or 40 years, his family will be able to dig that up out of the ground and then go sell it for scrap metal
the
and
scrappers.
fund their retirement.
Right. Well, I was thinking just to buy food in the post-apocalyptic hellscape, but either way, it's a good plan, good future plan.
Yeah.
And eat copper. I mean, you could.
Let's see what else we got in here.
Color
also matters. Black, for example, often
Yeah.
uses carbon to make the color. Carbon hurts RF. Yeah, well, I got to tell you, we always debate around the carbon fiber masts and them causing problems for you. I can tell you. So one thing, I made a 3D printed case for an Unknown that I was playing around with, and instead of screwing the lid on, I put a strip of black electrical tape around it, and I put it out in the backyard. And it was out in the sun all day. And when I went out to get it, the material that I used for the 3D print melted underneath the tape. It didn't melt anywhere else, but it melted underneath the tape because the temperature rose because it was black, which absorbs that heat or that light. So what I would say is that you do want them to be lightly colored, just from that standpoint, not just PVC, 3D printed material, but for other reasons as well.
Oh, now Bill is getting crazy too. These guys must be folding some y'all drug runners or something.
But he's about what he's using for ground radials and stuff.
80 by 80 meter sheet of solid copper that's plastic dipped. Listen, Escobar, dang it.
Yeah, that's going to be some serious.
I mean, that'd be an outstanding radial system, no doubt.
Bob's asking, does it matter if the wire is solid or stranded? I'm sure it's going to make a difference somewhere along the line. I use stranded, and you usually get better transfer with stranded, is my understanding, because you have more surface area.
More surface area,
yeah. Yeah, and the electricity tends to run across the surface.
And you're also changing the ohmic resistance of the wire enough.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really just comes down to surface area. So if you've seen a cage dipole, somebody will take 4 pieces of 450 ohm ladder line and put them into a square shape so that you get the outer skin effect of all of that. And it doesn't matter that the center is empty. I mean, technically a hollow copper pipe will do better than a similar sized copper wire, and it'd be a lot more affordable for you too. It's about the surface area, like we just mentioned. And Bill's right. Skin effect is the technical term in the test.
An interesting comment. Yeah, that one right there.
Yeah, and a lot of people use that the fence wire. Also, fence wire insulators are something that a lot of folks will use in their antenna building as well.
So you could use aluminum fence wire?
Sure. No, I've used aluminum wire for antennas. One of the things I'll tell you is that some of it, I guess it's tensile strength maybe, isn't strong. And so I think it's tensile strength. What'll happen is it'll stretch, and then that'll change the resonant frequency.
It's your accent. It sounds like you're talking about that stuff you put on Christmas trees.
That's what I said, tensile.
I was like, what are you talking about? Christmas tree?
Tensile strength.
That's what I said, tensile.
Right, exactly.
Go eat some Oh my God. Go eat some scrapple or something with that accent.
Yeah.
Go down Little Italy.
I don't know. I don't know what we're having for
Take
for
some
breakfast today.
pictures for nom noms.
I will. I should have taken. I made some really good baked potatoes last night. I should have taken some pictures.
Joe Brett posted some fabulous stuff. And
I thought he cooked that at first, but then he was saying that he was
I
at
missed
the.
that. He
was
didn't
at the
cook
Yeah, he
restaurant.
got it at a restaurant. He don't cook that good. He
Yeah,
had
did
some flavor on that tater. You know when Joe Brett makes food, he don't flavor his tater.
Right, he doesn't put.
Well, he does like dry taters. That's right.
He doesn't gravy it appropriately. Look at this. Bill's saying that back in the day, they used to use aluminum wire for AC wire in housing. It
Yep.
works, but now it's illegal. Yeah, a buddy of mine bought a house that caught fire based off of the aluminum wires. And, his wife instantly was like, I don't feel safe here anymore, and we need to move.
After the
And,
house caught fire, I wouldn't feel safe either. I don't blame her.
Yeah, so what he did is he actually had an electrician come out and rip all the wire out of the, claim to rip all the wire out. Who knows if they really did it, and then run copper.
Yeah, we had
It's big copper trying to
this
get you.
house was built in '61. We had a couple circuits that were aluminum, as Andy would say. And the problem is not aluminum wiring per se. The problem is where it interfaces with something that ain't aluminum.
Well, it can. Aluminum also gets swells and shrinks, right? So it loosens connections that way, and then you start to get sparks, right?
You just have to gauge up.
Well,
Yeah.
it may be so, but also where you have an aluminum wire touching a copper fitting, you have two different galvanic levels that will cause heating and sparking at a small level. Literally, we had an outlet burn. There was nothing wrong with the outlet. It just caught fire because it was hot. Thankfully, it was in the laundry room. Thankfully, we caught it, seconds after it started. But
Yeah, in my grandparents' house, it's a miracle it never burned down. But they had the big fuse panels that were. Their house was built like in the 20s. The fuses looked like light bulbs. You know what I mean? They were like these big glass things.
oh, yeah.
Every single one of them sons of bitches had a penny behind it because the fuse blew out, and my grandfather was so cheap he would just go down there and jam a penny in there without getting electrocuted, and then screw it back in. And so, like as a kid, I thought that was what you did. Fuse blew, you put a penny in there, and you're good to go.
Apparently, our grandfathers went to the same cheap old man.
It may have been the same guy. W7LOY saying, what about soggy ground as in WWA? How does that affect radials?
Western Washington, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing is that when you're looking at soggy ground, if it's fresh water, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to make a difference at all. If you're going to, or maybe it's a minimal difference. If it's marsh, brackish, or salt water, then it's going to improve the conductivity of the ground, and you're going to see an improvement there. Hopefully that answers your question, bud.
I mean, wet is probably good because it's going to increase conductivity to some extent, right? But it's not just wet is not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it's not entirely fresh water either.
Well, if you go back to your map, and I'm going to look at this, I'm going to do some research. That's code for Googling off your map because I'm interested.
You could do it too.
Why in the hell is Texas 30 and Alabama's 4? I mean, what the hell?
Everything's
Right.
bigger in Texas. Don't you know that, son?
Why is that one little small part of California 30? Because the whole state of California is, coastline.
Maybe somebody forgot to carry the one. Here's what you wanted to look at, right?
Yeah. I don't understand what's making that. So I want to read more about that.
Mississippi River, the Big Muddy.
No, son.
Who knows? Maybe it's the way the glaciers came dragging across. I really don't know.
Because that was my first thought, was that was along the Mississippi. But then you look at the map. No, it's not along the Mississippi.
It's where the glacier ran.
It's west. Well, it may be because that's basically the Great Plains.
Right.
So it may be mineral deposits is kind of where I'm going.
You got minerals in it. Maybe it's from all the buffaloes that used to run around and messing in the
Buffalo poo.
Yeah.
Fossilized buffalo turd.
It could be
I don't
what
know.
it is.
It's weird to me. And it apparently doesn't have anything to do with the ocean because the East Coast is.
Somebody earlier said that the specific Pacific Ocean is more saline, but they're all kind of mixed together, right? I mean, I don't know.
Well, you pull your map back up again. Show your map again.
Hold on, I think Randall's on to something here. He's saying it's because Dallas is all concrete and rebar. So
They made a ground plane.
he might be on to something here. All right, we got the map back up.
So if you look at the West Coast, it has nothing to do with Pacific Ocean salinity, because the only place there's a 30 is that one little spot in California, and immediately north of that is a 4. So the
Yeah, but
water between that 4 and that 30 is not going to be significantly different.
Yeah, but you also have like 8s and 15s and stuff as you go further south, which is
but you also have 4s again. And if you start up at Washington, there's all of Oregon and Washington are a 4.
Yeah, there was a question here.
I don't
Todd
know.
said he
Weird.
missed the map. Is higher or lower better? Higher is better. And what we saw was that on the link that I put up, the ocean is 5,000 millisiemens, which is fantastic. But when you look at the ground here,
Right.
it's significantly lower from a conductivity standpoint.
Why is the left half of the country a different shade than the right half of the country?
So this map was made of a composite. So they had multiple maps that they glued together in order to make this one, and so that's why you see it like that.
Okay, this is 2 different scans.
Similar to most of the pictures that NASA publishes of the Earth from space. Just putting it out there.
Oh, okay. Really?
And then we have our buddy Wick. He's saying that salt deposits underground. That might have something to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are some large salt deposits out west, which would mean Utah should be like a 40 or a 50. But
yeah, who knows? And then here's some comments about Florida. Florida's bad because it's all sand. The glades down here are better because of brackish water. And I would think that the brackish water is helping.
right. Wick said salt domes and oil. Yeah.
We got to get in there and get that oil out of there.
Bracket.
There we go. All right. Well, I think that that's probably going to end up wrapping it up. So let me get ready to close her down. Thanks to everybody in the chat. I really appreciate you participating and asking the questions. And a big thanks to my buddy T.O. and Jim for coming on here and helping me out with
Anytime,
the
brother.
conversation.
That's the best.
So everybody enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'm clicking the end broadcast. Thanks again.
See you, bud.